Okay, I've got a couple of functions here. One of them is called year list and one is called month list. And surprisingly enough, they produce a list of years and a list of months. You pass in the number of periods that you want and a start date, and it will add that many periods, either years or months, to the start date. So you end up with 6 rows starting from the start date. So these are the definitions. This is the month list. I won't go into detail about that. If you want to study it, great, but I'm not going to go into detail about how it works. And this is how the year list works. So that's all very simple. But what I would actually like to do is test the periods and the start to make sure that they're the right kind of data. Because if I put, let's say, the word hello in here, you can see it comes up with an error. And if I put, say, a negative number here, that doesn't help either. So let's put that back the way it was. So I'd like to apply some kind of type checking to periods and to start. Now, in both cases, periods needs to be a positive integer and start needs to be a date. So rather than putting the error checking in both functions, I'm going to kind of abstract it into a third function called period list, where we will pass the periods parameter and the start parameter and then do the checks, and then periods will return a lambda function, and the lambda function will apply the logic. So it will apply the function. So what's happening here is we check the periods, check that the periods are a number, and we check that the start date is, first of all, not negative and is a number. And then we convert them to integers, and just in case somebody's decided to put a decimal in there. And now we say, if both of those checks are true, then return this lambda function. And this lambda function takes one parameter, which is fn, and that fn is intended to be a function. And what it's trying to do is, first of all, check if that function is either the month list function or the year list function. Now, there's a problem here because the equals operator does not accept a lambda function as one of the operands. So we can't actually do this comparison. This doesn't work. And you can see that if I try to do period list here, and let's say the parameters and then the function can be year list, but it won't work because this comparison is not a valid comparison, and it just doesn't work. So this kind of falls down because of that. So I've kind of been thinking about this, and I think there is a way around it. And I want to just talk about it quickly, and then if you are willing to share your thoughts on what would be good modifications, that would be great as well. So in this version, I've changed the functions. So first of all, to each of month list and year list, I've added a third parameter called MD, and that MD stands for metadata. And it's an optional parameter which is either true or false. And the intent is that if that MD parameter is true, then rather than returning the list as defined previously, this function will return the name of the function. So in this case, it's month list, and in this case, it's year list. So if MD is true, then calling this function with MD true will return the name of the function. And because of that, the changes, because of that, we can now call the function in the period list function. So we'll say, get the name of the function by passing true and any value for the first two parameters, but we'll pass true into the function that is passed into this inner lambda. So after the checks are done and it returns a lambda function, we'll start checking the lambda function itself. So the first thing we'll do is we'll try to retrieve the name. Now, if we can retrieve the name, it will be stored in this fn name. If this expression causes an error itself, then it's likely because it doesn't have the right number of parameters. So if someone's passed a function into this Lambda function that doesn't have 3 parameters, then it will cause an error. So we want to just indicate that and store this text into the function name. Now the real check that makes it work is this check function, which is saying if either of these are true, so if the function name is either month list or the function name is year list, then we want to execute the function and return the list. For any other function, we don't want to execute it. We just want to return this default value here. So we're saying if check function, which is to say if either of these are true, then execute the function with the parameters that were passed into the period list function. Otherwise, we will just return this text. So that text will be returned in one of 2 scenarios. Either a function with the same number of parameters was passed into this Lambda, but it is not called month list and not called year list, or a function with a different number of parameters was passed in which case the function name resolves to error incorrect function signature, and this resolves to false, and therefore this is what's returned by the function. So let's just show you how it works. So we'll use the period list function and we will put the parameters in, and this, just like this, it returns that inner Lambda function. And so the Lambda function has 1 parameter, and that parameter is one of the year list or month list functions. So we just enter it like that. It doesn't go in text. And just by doing that, and because of the changes I made to return the name by passing true into MD, this now works because this check returns true, and therefore this if statement executes the function instead of returning the error. So just to show you, it works for month list, which returns a list of months. It does not work for day list. And day list is just a list of days. It's quite simple, but it returns function must be either month list or year list. If I pass some other function, and this function only has 2 parameters, because it only has 2 parameters, this fn name expression returns error incorrect function signature, and therefore check function returns false, and this if statement returns the message here. If you've got any comments, suggestions, or anything like that, let's chat about it. Thanks.